Hello, everyone, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed. Thank you all for checking out the show. This is the Final Destination edition of Movie Goodness. Today, we are celebrating this film franchise, which is entering its sixth film into this franchise with the release of Final Destination Bloodlines, which is scheduled for release on May 16th, 2025. And this franchise is sneakily one of my favorite horror franchises. I don't know what it is. I guess this falls under the guilty pleasure category, but I love this franchise. I just love the whole concept of Final Destination. The whole thing of a premonition happens before this major tragic event, and the survivors of that, or those who avoid the tragedy, are hunted down one by one by death itself. And off of that premise, I mean, you can make a million Final Destination films, and we've got six, so we're well on our way. But at this point, I thought there would be more. I thought there would be more of these films, and I understand, like, once you get to a certain point, it gets kind of stale, so you got to step away for a while. And this franchise definitely did step away for a while, for 14 years since the Final Destination 5 came out. And man, when you say that out loud, it's like, my God, it's been 14 years. I remember going to going to see that with my boy, and us sitting in there laughing at the movie, but we were laughing because we was enjoying it. And it's like, wow, 14 years. But that's besides the point. This has been an entertaining franchise. It's been a miss or two, but nothing that I'll be like, oh man, that is dead now. It's just, okay, we move on to the next one. It's kind of like other franchises that came out in the early 2000s, with your paranormal activities and Saws. You get a movie almost every year or every other year from those franchises, and they were moneymakers. The studio looked at them as moneymakers, so why stop? And hey, I get it. It was cool to see them come up with a different tragedy or a different accident every movie. How are we gonna up the ante from the last movie, I should say? And they tried, they did, and some worked. A couple of them didn't. But needless to say, they were all entertaining in their own right. And so this show, in celebration, I guess you could say, of the release of Final Destination Bloodlines, which I am super excited for. Aside from the fact that I like this franchise, that trailer and the premise to that film actually looks really, really good. It has the potential of being probably one of the best in the franchise. I'm gonna go ahead and throw that out there now. I'm probably gonna go see the film and be let down with standards set that high, but it really looks good. I love the concept because they're kind of twisting the whole core of the Final Destination lore, but still staying true to it at the same time. It's a little crazy to try to explain, but it made sense when I was watching the trailer. It got me really, really hyped up, and I'm excited for it. So in celebration of the release of that film, we're going to rank the previous 5 films, the released ones in this franchise, from worst to best. And this is my personal list. If you see it differently, if you feel this one should be number 1, or that one should be the worst, or this one should be more like the third one, that's your list, and I'm not going to argue with you. It hits differently. It's all subjective. Everybody has their own opinion. But for somebody who really loves horror movies, I really took my time on this. I went, sat down one weekend about, I'll say about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, and I went through all 5 of these movies back to back to back to back to back, and it was a good sit down because I started around maybe 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and it was just random. I wasn't even planning on doing a show on it, but I had like seen the trailer for Bloodlines, and I kind of, got a little excited. So I was like, man, let me go back and watch the first one. And I was just gonna watch the first one. So they're all on Max. At least they are at the time of this recording. Uh, I went back, watched it, and I enjoyed it so much. And when the movie finishes, and it'll say, "Oh, next up, you can watch. If you like this, you can watch the next one." Final Destination 2. So I went ahead and watched that one too. And once that one was over, because I vaguely remember too, and so once that one was over, I went ahead and said, "You know what? I'm in it now. I didn't watch 2 of them. I might as well go through the other 3." Because I haven't seen them in a while, and so I just watched them all that night. And I forgot what time I finished. Uh, at the end of 5, I want to say it was probably around 1 or 2 o'clock that evening. I just watched them all. You know, no interruptions, and I had a good time that night. I really did. I loved this. It made me reappreciate this franchise. And while I was sitting there watching them, I was like, man, which one I liked better? Which one didn't really hit? I said, you know what? That would make a good show. And so here we are. Here we are. I'm going to rank all 5 of these films in anticipation for the new edition and have some fun with it. This isn't a review. I'm not going to review all 5 films. We'll be here. This will be the longest show I ever did. So I don't have time for that. And I know you don't have time for that. So I'm just going to rank them, and I will touch in on them. I will discuss why I have it ranked where I have it ranked at, but not a thorough breakdown of each and every film like we normally do when we review a film here on the KB Radio Network. But we're going to have some fun with it. But before we get into the ranking, let's discuss how this franchise came to be and what this franchise is all about. It's a horror franchise, of course, and it consists of 5, you might as well say 6 films now, 2 novels, and 2 comic books that are based on this franchise. It was based on an unpublished or unproduced spec script from Jeffrey Reddick, and it was originally written for an X-Files television show. This was going to be an episode of the X-Files, believe it or not. And I think X-Files, the producers, rejected it. And next thing you know, they produced it and made it into a movie. And the rest, as we say, is history. But all of his films is set around the premise of a small group of people who escape impending death after one individual has a sudden premonition and warns them about a major disaster that is about to occur. After avoiding their foretold death seen in these visions, the survivors are later killed one by one in bizarre accidents caused by an unseen force by creating complicated chains of cause and effect. As I said before, this was written by, at least the first film, was written by Jeffrey Reddick, and he came up with this premise after he read a story about a woman who was on vacation, and her mom called her and said, don't take the flight tomorrow. She was about to come back home, and her mom called her and was like, don't take the flight tomorrow. I have a bad feeling about it. And so the woman switched flights. She listened to her mama like a good child should, and she switched flights, and the plane was that she was originally supposed to be on crashed. So he was intrigued by that story, and that was a true story. And so I guess you could say technically the Final Destination film franchise is based on a true story. And so, originally, having written the script for an episode of The X-Files, Reddick decided to turn the script into a feature-length film at the behest of one of New Line Cinema's colleagues. After developing the feature idea, New Line Cinema hired Reddick to write a screenplay. James Wan and Glenn Morgan were later brought on board to write the shooting script and make alterations to comply with their standards. And Jeffrey Reddick has sole story credit and shares screenplay credit with James Wan and Glenn Morgan. And those two gentlemen have collaborated on a lot of projects and some successful ones as well. They have teamed up with The One. You remember that film with Jet Li? They worked together on that. Willard, that remake, they worked together on that. Along with Final Destination, they also came back to do Final Destination 3, Black Christmas, and that probably one of the worst films ever made. And I mean, I'm not even throwing it out there just to be controversial or to say anything out of turn. I think everybody can agree. Dragon Ball Evolution. Even if you're not a Dragon Ball fan, if you never watched the anime or nothing like that, you can agree that that was the worst movie ever. But aside from feature films, they also worked on television. They worked on the X-Files, which I'm assuming that's where they met Jeffrey Reddick and a number of other shows, 21 Jump Street, The Commish, a lot more. But they are kind of mainstays in Hollywood. Yeah, I haven't seen much from them in a while, actually, since Dragon Ball Evolution, which I can understand why I haven't seen much from them in a while. But they at that time in 2000, yeah, they were the ones to get. And James Wan directed, and Glenn Morgan, he helped write the screenplay and whatnot. And this got the ball rolling on, I'm pretty sure nobody imagined, a film franchise that has lasted for 25 years. And without further ado, let's jump in to this list. 5-1. We're counting it down. The Final Destination film rankings. Let's start with number 5. And number 5 is disappointing. It's disappointing on a lot of fronts, because this film, this addition to the franchise, was filmed here in New Orleans. And so I had a lot of hopes for it. And, whenever a movie is filmed in or around the New Orleans area, I get excited for and I cheer for, because I want it to succeed so more films can come and film down here. I know that's not a factor into that, but in my mind, in my little crazy mind, it does. So that's what I was hoping for. And this one was in 3D as well. And this film came out in 2009, and it is the Final Destination. And the reason it was named the Final Destination, this was meant to be the last addition to this franchise. In the Final Destination, it follows a group of people after they escape a deadly accident during a stock car race, with death stalking and killing them one by one. This addition to the franchise is directed by David R. Ellis. It is, like I said, a 3D horror film. And, around that time, 2009, 2010, around that little era, 3D was the craze. Everything was in 3D. Everything was in 3D. But a lot of them were being converted after production. But this film was actually shot in 3D. And so that was exciting, to see the accident and stuff like that. This was the worst. This was the worst of the franchise. It really really did not hit. It didn't hit. The main thing was the main thing that took me out of it was the accident, was the life changing thing, with this car wreck at this racetrack, and the wreck caused the stadium to crumble and all this. It was silly. It was so silly. I know they were trying to do something different, but it was just so unbelievable. And I know saying that about this particular franchise is is ridiculous, but it's the truth. It, even with a ridiculous franchise, it still was even more ridiculous. And this was probably the only one that I can think of that is kind of standalone in the franchise. The other ones are kind of connected to one another in some shape, form, or other. It's not directly, but they're connected. This one was not connected with the other films at all. And that's another reason why it kind of didn't work. But, the kills in it is, you'll never hear me complain about the kills in all of these movies because there are innovative ways and stuff like that. But like I said, this one was more silly and goofy in the way, in the matters of the way people were taken out, and it just didn't flow. We're going to get into it when we go through the other films, how they flow with the deaths, how death works. He'll cause the water in the sink to overflow and make the floor wet, to whereas you'll slip and hit the table and cause a knife on the table to flip in the air and fall in your chest, and then a bookcase falls and it hits you and it causes the knife to go further through your heart. It's something silly like that, but it all works together and it flows. It's cool the way it happened. I know it sounds horrible. Horrible for me to be celebrating that, but I'm in the context of a film, not in real life. In the film, it was cool, but I just did not enjoy this film. But ironically enough, this was the most financially successful. This one made the most money out of all 5 of the Final Destination films. It grossed $186 million worldwide, and that's mind-boggling how the worst one, in my opinion, made the most money. But hey, like I said, it's all subjective. But that's my placement for the Final Destination, which came out in 2009. It lands at number 5. Coming in at number 4 on the list is the second film in the franchise, and it is Final Destination 2, which came out in 2003. This film is once again directed by David R. Ellis, and is kind of odd that both of my bottom movies were directed by David R. Ellis. He didn't direct any other ones in the franchise, but the 2 that he did direct landed at the bottom of my list. And and that's not a testament to David R. Ellis, who passed away a few years ago. He directed Snakes on a Plane as well, and I love Snakes on a Plane. But these 2 films in this franchise, not so much. And like I said, I don't hate these. They're just ranked low. I don't hate them. I love the entire franchise, but if putting them in order, this is the order they go in. And this one was a direct sequel, of course, to the original, to the first film, Final Destination from 2000. And in this film, a woman who cheats death after having a premonition of herself and other travelers on a highway pile up and used it by saving herself and a handful of people, but is stalked by death afterwards by means of claiming back their lives, which should have been lost on the highway. It also resolves the cliffhanger of the previous film by revealing the fates of our previous survivors. This in Final Destination 2, this is the one where everybody who's seen this movie and you're driving on a highway or a freeway or interstate, and you see that truck with the logs on the back of it, your mind immediately goes to Final Destination 2, because that's what caused all of that pile up and death on that highway when that the chains broke on the truck that was hauling the logs. And it was cool. That was cool. I like I said, I loved the out of all these films, with the exception of the Final Destination, all of the others, the other four that set up the event that caused death to come after him, I loved that. I loved the setup. You know, this was really cool, and I really, really liked part two. And part two would have been ranked higher if it was kind of, I would say, towards the end. The end betrayed this movie. It was really telling a good story. I was intrigued. It felt like it was connected to the original, but it was its own film, standing on its own. But then they started to rely on the first film more than it had to. It really didn't need to lean on it. You know, you brought back Allie later, who was in the first film, who played Claire Rivers, and she, along with Tony Todd, were the only two characters to cross over to other films. And, you know, because, you know, death. He kills him. But Tony Todd, he survived. Tony Todd is going to be in Bloodlines. That was his last performance before he passed away last year. But yeah, she came back to connect it to the other film. We find out that our main character from Final Destination in 2000, the first film, he died, but he died off screen. So we didn't know what happened to him. We know what happened to the other ones. We saw that, but we didn't see what happened to our main protagonist from the first film. So that was upsetting. The end result, as even though they kind of made up for it at the very, very end, you know, in that final scene, it still didn't work. It still didn't work because you had survivors. You had survivors in this movie. And that just poo-poos on the whole lore of Final Destination. You know, there were no survivors in any other film other than this one. And at least to the point whereas it's left open-ended. To this point, they survived. They lived on happily ever after. As opposed to other films where that didn't happen. Even when they crossed over, even when they lived at the end of that film, we find out in the next film, no, no, they didn't. Death did catch up to him. You know, death is going to catch up to you. So that's the part that kind of upset me, to the point where it just didn't work. And the way that they beat death, or cheated death, I should say, was just I just couldn't get with it. You know, it was a cheap way to win over death, because come on, think about it. It's death. They're not running from Kevin Reed. They're running from death. You can't run from death, and you can't cheat death. But in that sense, to whereas I don't know, it was just so convoluted at the end. But the movie was working. It was actually working. Another thing that kind of bumped it down was the fact you had I think the dude was like 19, maybe even in his 20s. And in the movie, they had him playing like he was 12 or 13. And that's how it was written in the script. And I read somewhere that they didn't change the age of the character, even though they cast this guy who was much, much, much older. It was written for a 12-year-old, but they cast the guy that was basically in his 20s, and they didn't change it. So he had to act like he was 12, but he came off as being slow, you know, special. And it really threw you off. At least it threw me off. And I just could not get with that. It was just sad when Death caught him, even though that was probably the most innovative, funny way to kill somebody in that moment. But that character just was not working, and you didn't feel any sympathy but laughter. That's the only emotion that you could you could display at that moment. But yeah, that's why this one ranks as low as it does. But aside from that, I mean, the story was working for the most part. You know, pros and cons. There's more pros than cons, but uh, it was just the cons were big, and it took away from this one. At number 4, it is Final Destination 2, which came out in 2003. This film grossed $90 million worldwide. And as of today, it is the lowest grossing film in the franchise. We'll see if Final Destination Bloodlines is able to beat it. But yes. But our next film at number 3, if I would have made this list before I rewatched all of them a couple of weeks ago, this one probably would have been at number 1. This how much I held it in high esteem. I love this addition to the franchise, but once I rewatched them all, it kind of fell behind, but it still didn't take away from my love and respect that I had for this film. It is Final Destination 3, which comes in at number 3 on my list. This film came out in 2006. This film had a returning James Wan directing, who directed the first film in the franchise. And this one is also kind of a standalone in the sense of it's not really connected to the first film. All of the other ones connect to the first film in a kind of a offshoot way. But in this addition to the franchise, Final Destination 3, it takes place 5 years after the first film, and a college, or should I say a high school graduate who has a premonition that a roller coaster she and her classmates are riding on will derail. Although she saves some of them, death begins hunting the survivors. She realizes photographs that she took at that amusement park contains clues about her classmate's death. This was the most innovative way out of all 5 films that Death took out and left clues, left little Easter eggs. The premonition wasn't just a vision. It actually lingered throughout the whole time they were at that amusement park, with her pictures. And when you look at the pictures, it didn't show how they would die, but there were subtle clues in every photo that showed how they were going to die. And so her and this other guy, who survived, they're trying to get Death to skip. If they were able to stop it, Death would skip over them. And so they're trying to stop that person by studying the pictures and seeing, oh, there's a fan in the background, or there's a knife in this background, or whatever the case may be, or they have their head exposed in this kind of way. It was so cool the way they did it here. And the accident, the derailing of that roller coaster, the way that was shot was also awesome. I love that. Who's the actress here? She's Mary Elizabeth Winstead. She's the main star here. She did cool. She was a cool final girl in this horror film. I liked her in here. What makes this film stand out a lot more than the other ones, you felt Death's presence in this movie, as opposed to just happy accidents or unhappy accidents in the other films that took out everybody. You felt the presence of Death, like putting things in order, like they did in the first film. You felt the presence of Death in the first film. You felt the presence of Death and a couple other ones, but here you really felt them. It was like a hand, like an invisible hand. The way the camera moved and stuff would move into place. you know, putting things in order so you can trip over this and cause this chain reaction to cause this to ultimately you falling and choking on a chicken wing or something. You know, it was so innovative and cool. That's why I enjoyed this one a lot more than I did a lot of them. But once, like I said, once I rewatched them all, I grew a greater appreciation for a couple of more that I just had to put in front of it. But this was one of the best of this franchise. Destination 3 comes in at number 3 on this list. It grossed $118 million worldwide. And this is the one I probably rewatched more than any other ones. I think I've seen this one maybe five to six more times than I did the other ones combined. So I have a special place in my heart for Final Destination 3, but it still lands at number 3. And so we move on to number 2, the runner up in the Final Destination film rankings. And it's the one that started it all, Final Destination, which came out in the year 2000, directed by James Wan. This film is so good. And like I said, if I wouldn't have rewatched these movies, I probably would have had it lower because I vaguely remembered it. So when I rewatched it, I was like, man, this movie is better than it's supposed to be. And it's surely better than I remember it being. And this movie is really, now I'm not saying, oh, it was robbed of an Oscar that year. I'm not going that far. I'm just saying it was so good. It was so good. In this film, a teenager who cheats death after having a premonition of a catastrophic plane explosion. He and several of his classmates leave the plane before the explosion occurs, but death later takes the lives of those who were meant to die on the plane. As I said to start off the show, this is where the premise of this entire franchise, or I should say just this film, came to be when the writer Jeffrey Reddick read a story about a mother who called her daughter who was on vacation and said, don't get on the plane tomorrow. Don't get on that plane. So she switched planes, and the one she was supposed to get on crashed. And so it was I don't know if anybody looked into that with the mom, like what's going on. You know, but yeah, so he wrote the film around that premise. And this was so cool because you know, this was new. You know, around this era, we're getting slasher movies. We're getting the mass killers coming after teenagers on prom night and stuff like that. You know, your typical teenage horror movies, and they have their place. You know, I enjoy them for what they are, but that was the norm. And so we have this supernatural horror film with teenagers and with death coming at them. You don't have a mass killer. You don't have a serial killer or a zombie or a vampire or a werewolf or none of these other things. You have death, this invisible force, you know, or this spiritual force or however you want to call it, coming after you that you can't fight. You can't, you know, shoot. You can't blow up in a building or run away from. You know what I'm saying? This is something that is real, because like it or not, people, death comes for us all. At one point, we're all gonna leave this earth in one way or another. Hopefully, is peacefully in our beds, but in this case, when it comes to these horror films, not so much. And you know, it really hit with me a lot because I have a fear of flying. I only been on a plane once, well, technically twice, to get to Las Vegas and to get back home. But those are the only two times I've been on a plane, and that was recently. I have never flown. I'm scared to death, dude. I'm scared to death of flying. And so you had this movie. You had this movie where the plane explodes and all this. It's like, no, man, count me out of it. Count me out of it. That alone frightens me. But the way that death takes out the survivors of that plane was, oh my god, it was so cool. You're seeing decapitations in weird ways, and it's freak accidents. It's not like these convoluted things that you know you cook up in a visual effects lab or something like that. These are things that technically can happen, you know, just home accidents, or you know what I'm saying, getting hit by a train or getting hit by a bus, walking out on the street and a bus come and hit you, and stuff like that. It's just simple little things, but there's the way it was shot, the way it was filmed, made it frightening. Uh, that's what kills me, no pun intended, about this franchise. It's normal, everyday things that can take you out. What's more frightening than that? You know what I'm saying? And so, yes, that's why this film ranks so high on the list. And it's the original. If it wasn't for this one, if this one didn't work, we wouldn't be getting Final Destination Bloodlines in a couple of days here. And so it's you know, this had to work, and it definitely did work. Really enjoyed it, and when I rewatched it, I was blown away because it was like watching it for the first time. I'm like, man, I don't remember this being this good. I really did, and it felt good watching it. And like I said to start off, I said I was just gonna watch the first one, but the first one, when I rewatched it, I was like, man, this was good. It made me want to watch the rest, which I did. And yeah, this was a gem. This was a real gem. Final Destination, which came out in the year 2000, comes in at number 2. It grossed $112 million worldwide. It was the only one in the franchise that I would really consider horror. It's the one that I would consider a scary movie. It you know, not frightening, whereas you hiding under the bed, you know, from the boogeyman, but I would say that it's the only one that will make you jump. You know, it actually had legitimate jump scares in this film. And so that leads us to our number 1 film in the Final Destination film franchise, which probably, if you're a big Final Destination head, you're probably going to be mad with it. But I mean, I don't know what it is. And trust me, I get it. But for some strange reason, I love this movie more than the other 4 movies in the franchise. And it is Final Destination 5, which came out in 2011. This was directed by Stephen Quayle. And in this one, a young man has a premonition and saves a group of people from death when a suspension bridge begins to collapse. However, they soon learn that they cannot escape death's plan. This one came out after the Final Destination, which was supposed to be the last one, but they threw this one in after, you know, especially after it made so much money. The Final Destination made a lot of money because it was supposed to be the last one. And so I guess a lot of people treated it as an event, and so they went out to go see it. And it made so much money, the studio said, well, we can't stop there. We got to keep going. And they came up with this one. And I'm not mad at it. We're better off for it. I really love this movie. I just love everything about this movie. I don't know why. I don't know why it's my favorite. And I know this is odd. And I know this isn't your conventional ranking talk. You know, you're supposed to have a thorough, thought out explanation as to why it's number 1. I honestly can't give it to you. I tried to realign this list and put it somewhere else. I just couldn't. If I would have did that, I would have been untruthful to me, which in turn would have been untruthful to you. And I made it a point. I've dedicated this show to tell you nothing but the truth. And the truth is, this is my favorite Final Destination film. Can't put my finger on it. I loved the sequence with the bridge collapsing. Absolutely loved it. I loved all the deaths. You know, they were funny. They were innovative. They were cool, you know. And what really put it over the edge, when I sat in the theater and watched this in 2011, I sat there just thinking it was going to be a random Final Destination film. And I know this is a cheap pop in a way. This is a cheap reason for me putting it at number one, but it's my reason nonetheless. I sat there in the theater. I sat there in the theater, and as somebody who has been watching movies their whole life, have been going to the movies their whole life, who have dreamed of making movies their whole life, and just engulfing themselves into movies and films and TV shows his whole life, I'd like to protest that I've seen it all, I've heard it all, and you can't get one over on me. This movie got one over on me. I sat in that theater and did not realize for the entire runtime of this movie until the very last shot of the film, I did not know that this was a prequel to Final Destination from 2000. Did not connect the dots. Now, when you go back and watch it now, you see all the pieces. You see the flip phones. You see that the cars, the style, the stuff they were listening to on the radio and things like that. They hinted to it. They never said it in the movie. They never just spilled out that this was 1999 or whatever. They never said none of that. They let you figure it out yourself. And me being an idiot, I did not know. Now, I know I'm saying this, and I know there are people who are screaming into their phones, their TVs, or wherever you're listening to this show, which I appreciate, by the way. You're an idiot, Kevin. How you didn't know that? I picked up on it the first scene. Oh, I saw it when they was in the van or on the bus or whatever. Hey, good on you. You're a smarter person than me. I didn't get it. It went completely over my head the first time I watched it. I just couldn't believe it. And in that final scene, when our protagonist gets on that plane, and it still didn't dawn on me. And I knew the movie wasn't over, but I'm like, okay, so they're going to do the plane crash thing, to kind of bookend this franchise. And all of a sudden, you see the characters from the first movie getting drug off of that plane. And all of a sudden, it clicked. This was the prequel. I'm sitting in there, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And I didn't say kidding. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Are you serious? And all of a sudden, the plane explodes with our main character of this film still on the plane, as our protagonists from the first film are safely on the ground. And it's like, wow, good job. That's good writing. I don't care. I know this is a cheap throwaway franchise, but that's good writing, man. You got to hand it off to them. The director and the writers of this film, they did a good job of hiding that. Even if they didn't hide it, like I said, on rewatch, I knew it because I've seen it. Even on rewatch, I still had a good time watching it and appreciating what was to come and how we got to that point. Everything was earned, It's such a good movie. Look, I know that this is a subjective list, and I know a lot of people are going to have a different list if you're a fan of this franchise, or a reordered list. But to be honest with you, you can't go wrong. Other than the Final Destination, that's got to be everybody's number 5. I really can't. If your list doesn't start off with that, I don't want to talk. But anyway, but I'm just joking. But it is a really good franchise, and my number 1 is Final Destination 5, which came out in 2011. This film grossed $157 million. It's the second highest grossing film in the franchise, and it's worth every penny. It deserved every penny. It was really, really that good, and kudos to them, and kudos to this franchise, man. This is a fun franchise. are real fun. This isn't, a deep philosophical, deep thinking franchise that's going to make you go home and reevaluate your life decisions. It's not that. It's really just a fun horror franchise. And that's what got me hyped up for this new addition into this franchise. I can't wait to see it because I would love to see where I'm going to put that one on this list. Now that it has expanded to 6. But for now, the 5 goes number 5, The Final Destination, number 4, Final Destination 2, and number 3, Final Destination 3, and number 2, Final Destination, and at number 1, Final Destination 5. That's my list. I would love to know your list. What is your favorite Final Destination film in this franchise? Are you excited for Final Destination Bloodlines, which comes out in theaters on May the 16th? Let me know by email, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, don't forget about YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. Subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel and like this video if you don't mind. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing the show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to Movie Goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this edition of Movie Goodness, where we ranked all 5 of the Final Destination films. Want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everyone. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.